Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome back with me, Miss Ira, in the presentations of CEFR. All right, today we are going to talk about the last chapter of the book of Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, Learning, Teaching, Assessment. Okay, we are going to talk about assessment. All right, this is the table of contents. There are 4 sub-chapters in this chapter. The first is introduction. Introduction about assessment. What is assessment? Assessment is used in this chapter in the sense of the assessment of the proficiency of the language user. And then there are 3 concepts that are traditionally seen as fundamental to any discussion of assessment. The first is validity, the second is reliability, and the third or the last is feasibility. What's the meaning of validity, reliability, and feasibility? Let's explain one by one. Okay, validity is the concept with which the framework is concerned. And what about reliability? Reliability is basically the extent to which the same rank in order of candidates is replicated into separated, real, or stimulated administration of the same assessment. And then feasibility is the procedure needs to be practical adapted to the available elements and features. And then the second subchapter is the framework as the resources for assessment. There are 3. The specification of the content and tests and examinations. The second is the criteria for the attainment of learning objectives. And the third is describing the levels of proficiency in tests, the examination to aid comparison. Okay, this is the table for the specification of the content of tests and examinations. The framework categories for communicative activities employed are, right, this is for spoken and written, and then the interaction and also the production. Okay, the interaction consists of spontaneous and short turns, and the production consists of prepared and long turn. For the spoken activities are conversation, informal discussion, and goal-oriented or cooperation. And then the production of spoken activities are description of his or her academic field. And for the written, the interaction is there's no explanation about it. And then the production of written is also a report or description of his or her academic field also. And then the criteria for the attainment of learning objective, there are two. The first is descriptors of communicative activities. And then the second is descriptors of a set of proficiency related to the particular competences. Okay, descriptors of communicative activities. Descriptors of communicative activities can be used in 3 separated ways in relation to the attainment of objectives. The first is construction, the second is reporting, the third is self or teacher assessment. Okay, let's explain one by one. For the construction, the skills for communicative activities help in the definition of a specification for the design of assessment task. And then for reporting, skills for communicative activities can also be very useful for reporting results. Users of the product of the educational system, such as employers, are often interested in the overall outcomes rather than in a detailed profile of competence. And the last is self or teacher assessment. All right. Finally, descriptors for communicative activities can be used for self and teacher assessment in various ways, of which the following are examples. The first is checklist, the second is grid. Checklist for continuous assessment or for summative assessment at the end of course. And for grid, for continuous or summative assessment, rating a profile and to a grade of selected categories. And this is the descriptors of aspect of proficiency related to the particular competences. Descriptors of aspect of proficiency can be used in two main ways in relation to attainment of objectives. The first is self or teacher assessment, and the second is performance assessment. All right, self or teacher assessment, provided the descriptors are positive. Independent statement, they can be included in the checklist for self and teacher assessment. And then for performance assessment, a more obvious use for scales of descriptors on aspect of competence from chapter 5, okay, is to over starting point for the development of assessment criteria. By guiding personal, non-systematic impressions into considered judgments, such descriptors can help develop a shared frame of reference among the group of assessors concerned. All right. There are basically three ways in which descriptors can be presented to use as assessment criteria. Firstly, descriptors can be presented as a scale. All right. When combining descriptors for different categories into the one holistic paragraph per level, this is a very common approach. And secondly, they can be presented as a checklist, usually with one checklist for relevant level, often with descriptors group under headings or under categories. Checklists are less usual for live assessment. And thirdly, they can be presented as a grade of selected categories in EVAC as a set of parallel scales for separate categories. This approach makes it possible to give a diagnostic profile. However, there are limits to the number of categories that assessor can cope with. And then there are three distinct different ways in which one can provide a grade of subscale. The first is proficiency scale, and the second is examination rating scale. For proficiency scale, by providing a profile grade defining the relevant levels for certain categories, for example, from levels A2 to level B2. And then examination rating scales by selecting or defining a descriptor for each relevant category, which describes the desired pass standard of norm for a particular module or examination for that category. And then describing the levels of proficiency in task and examination to aid comparison. All right, the measurement literature recognizes 5 classic ways of linking separated assessment versus equating or producing an alternative version of just for the same test. The second is calibrating, linking the result from the different tests to a common scale. The third is statistical model, or correcting for the difficulty of test papers of severity of examiners. And the fourth is benchmarking, the comparison of work samples in relation to standardized definition and examples. And the fifth is social moderation, building up a common understanding through discussion. Okay. And then the scales of descriptors make up a conceptual grid which can be used to relate national and institutional framework to each through the medium of the common framework, and then map the objectives for a particular examination and course modules using the categories and levels of the scales. And the third subchapter is types of assessment. All right. Let's talk about types of assessment. These are types of assessment, just like achievement assessment or proficiency assessment, and then non-referencing or NR, criterion referencing or CR, mastery learning, CR, continuous CR, and then continuous assessment or fixed assessment points, formative assessment or summative assessment, direct assessment or indirect assessment, performance assessment or knowledge assessment, and then subjective or objective assessment, and then checklist or performance rating, impression guided judgment, and then holistic or analytic assessment, and then series or category assessment, and the last is assessment by others or self-assessment. These are the explanations about each assessment, yeah? The first is achievement assessment or proficiency assessment. For achievement assessment is the assessment of the achievement of specific objectives. Okay, assessment of what has been taught, that has been we learned. Okay, it relates to the week's or term's work, the course book or the syllabus. All right, the achievement assessment is oriented to the course. It represents an internal perspective. And for proficiency assessment, another is assessment of what someone can do or knows in relation to the application of subject in the real world. It represents an external perspective. And then norm referencing and criterion referencing. Norm referencing is the placement of learners in rank order, their assessment and ranking in relation to their peers. Okay, and then criteria referencing is a reaction against norm referencing, in which the learner is assessed purely in terms of his or her ability in the subject, irrespective of the ability of his or her peers. What about mastery learning CR or continuum CR? The mastery criterion referencing approach is one with a single minimum competence standard or cutoff point is that to divide learners into masters and non-masters with no decrease of quality in the achievement of the objective being recognized. And for the continuum criterion referencing approach is an approach in which an individual ability is referenced to a defined continuum of relevant degrees of ability in the area in question. Next, for continuous assessment or fixed assessment point. Continuous assessment is assessment by the teacher and possibly by the learners of class performance, pieces of work, and a project throughout the course. And then fixed point assessment is when grades are awarded and decisions made on the basis of an examination or other assessment which take place on a particular day, usually the end of the course or before the beginning of a course. And then the next assessment is formative assessment and summative assessment. Formative assessment is an ongoing process of gathering information on the extent of learning, on strengths and the weaknesses which the teacher can feedback into their course planning and the actual feedback they give learners. All right. Formative assessment is often used in a very broad sense so as include non-quantifiable information from the questionnaires and consultations. And what about summative assessment? Sums up attainment at the end of the course with a grade. So we do summative assessment in the end of the course with a grade. Yeah, it's not necessarily proficiency assessment. Indeed, a lot of summative assessment is no reference, fixed point, and achievement assessment. And then direct and indirect assessment. Direct assessment is assessing what the candidate is actually doing. And the teacher do the direct assessment. For example, in a small group are discussing something, the assessor observes and then it compares with the criteria grid, match with the performance to the most appropriate categories on the grid and gives an assessment. And for indirect assessment, uses a task, usually on a paper, with which often assess enabling skills. And next is performance and knowledge assessment. Performance assessment requires to the learning provided a sample of language in speech or writing in a direct test. And then the next is knowledge assessment, requires to the learner to answer questions which can be of a range of different item types in order to provide evidence of the extent of their linguistic knowledge and control. All right, this is for subjective assessment or objective assessment. And then subjective assessment is a judgment by an assessor. So the judgment from an assessor, what is normally meant by this is the judgment of the quality of performance. And then objective assessment is assessment in which subjectivity is removed. What is normally meant by this is an indirect test in which the items have only one right answer. For example, multiple choice, just like multiple choice, yeah. And then this is subjectivity in assessment can be reduced, and validity and reliability is increased by taking steps like the following. Okay, just like the step language specification for the content assessment, using pool judgment, adapting standard procedures, providing definitive marking, and requiring multiple judgments, and then undertaking appropriate training, and then checking the quality of the assessment. And then rating on a scale or rating on a checklist. For rating on a scale, is judging that a person is at a particular level or band on a scale made up of a number of such levels or bands. And then rating on a checklist, judging a person in relation to a list of points, deemed to be relevant for a particular level or module. And then impression or guided judgment. For impression, fully subjective judgment made on the basis of experience of the learner's performance in class without reference specific criteria in relation to a specific assessment. And for guided judgment, is a judgment in which individual assessor subjectivity is reduced by complementing impression with conscientious assessment in relation to the specific criteria. And then holistic assessment or analytic assessment. For holistic assessment is making a global synthetic judgment. Different aspects are weighed intuitively by the assessor. And then analytic assessment is looking at the different aspects separately. And what about series and category assessment? Category assessment involves a single assessment task, in which performance is judged in relation to the categories in an assessment grid. And then series assessment involves a series of isolated assessment tasks, often role plays with other learners or the teachers, which are related with a simple holistic grade on a level scale, for example, 0 until 3 or 1 to 4. And then assessment by others of self-assessment. Assessment by others means judgment by the teacher or examiner. And self-assessment, judgment about your own proficiency. Okay, so we judge ourselves. So it's called self-assessment. And the last subchapter in this chapter is visible assessment and meta system. All right. For example, the visible assessment and meta system are twin taking strategies, cooperating strategies, asking for clarification, fluency, flexibility, coherence, thematic development, precision, sociolinguistic competence, general range, vocabulary range, grammatical accuracy, vocabulary control, and phonological control. Okay, that's all about the assessment. There are a lot of I'm so sorry, I mean so many types of assessment that common use and often to use. Okay, I hope that you can understand all of them. And don't forget to read CEFR book. I hope that all of the material can be useful for all of us. Thank you for watching this video. Bye-bye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.